Welcome back to Beyond the Badge. There are moments in life that strip everything away. The titles, the illusions, the carefully constructed idea of who we think we are and what we think we know about the person standing in front of us. And sometimes it takes only one afternoon, one crowd, and one man in handcuffs to reveal exactly what a room full of powerful people is truly made of. This is that afternoon. This is that man. And this is that moment. The California coastline had never looked more beautiful, and somehow that made everything that followed feel even more cruel. The Caldwell estate stretched along the bluffs above the Pacific like something from a dream. White stone columns rising against the sky so blue it almost looked painted. Crystal chandeliers catching the afternoon light and scattering it across 300 guests dressed in silk and diamonds, and the quiet, unspoken confidence of people who have never once been made to feel like they don't belong somewhere. Imported roses lined every pathway. Champagne older than most of the children in attendance moved through the crowd on silver trays. The ocean roared softly in the background, steady and indifferent, as though it had seen too much of human nature to be surprised by any of it. Catherine Caldwell stood near the entrance in a silver gown, pearls resting at her throat, greeting each arrival with the warm precision of a woman who had spent decades performing grace so consistently that she had long since forgotten the difference between performing it and feeling it. She knew every name, every family connection, every thread of influence that wove through that crowd like invisible silk. She was ready for everything. She was ready for everything except for the modest sedan that rolled quietly through the iron gates at 2:30, without escort, without announcement, without so much as a second glance from the attendants who had been tipping their caps at luxury vehicles all afternoon. The car stopped, and a man stepped out. He moved carefully, the way men move when decades of carrying weight, real weight, not the metaphorical kind, have taught them that every step deserves intention. He was 59 years old, broad across the shoulders, dark-skinned with close-cut silver at his temples, and eyes that held the particular stillness of someone who has stood in rooms far more dangerous than this one and come out the other side carrying everyone else with him. His suit was deep navy, tailored and clean, and pinned above his left breast pocket were decorations that told the complete story of a man's life, if anyone in that courtyard had been willing to read them. A purple heart, a bronze star, a medal for valor. His name was General Marcus Reed. 4 stars, 36 years of service to the United States Army. He had commanded thousands of men and women in conditions that most of the guests on that estate could not imagine surviving for a single hour. He had planned operations in complete darkness that protected civilians who would live out their entire lives never knowing his name. He had held dying soldiers in his arms and told them they were not alone, even when his own heart was breaking inside his chest. He had written letters, the hardest letters a human being can write, to mothers and fathers and young wives and small children, choosing every word with the care of someone who understands that some wounds never fully close. He had given everything. And today, on this particular Saturday, beneath this particular sky, he was not here as a general. He was not here for recognition or tribute or ceremony. He was here because of a promise. He reached into his jacket, confirmed the invitation, straightened his lapel with one quiet motion, and walked toward the entrance. The promise had been made 7 years earlier in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and quiet grief to a man named Colonel James Whitfield, his closest friend, his brother in everything but blood, who had reached up from a hospital bed with trembling hands and asked Marcus to do one thing, just one thing, if the day ever came that he couldn't be there himself. Walk my Emily down the aisle. Marcus had taken his hand and said, "You have my word." James had died 11 days later, and Marcus Reed had never once considered not coming. He did not know, as he walked across that courtyard with his invitation in hand and his word in his heart, that the crowd around him had already begun to decide who he was. Catherine Caldwell saw him before he reached the steps. Her eyes moved across him in less than 2 seconds. It was not a conscious cruelty, and perhaps that is what made it so devastating. It was reflex. It was the kind of silent, instant assessment that builds up over a lifetime of living inside a world that has taught certain people to sort others before they've spoken a single word. She did not see the decorations above his pocket. She did not see the invitation in his hand. She did not see 36 years of sacrifice stitched into every line of that man's face. She saw what she had been shaped to see. And one word left her lips, quietly, almost politely, the way one might request a minor adjustment to the table settings. Security. That word moved through the crowd the way a single stone moves water, in rings spreading outward, touching everything. Heads turned, phones lifted, first slowly, then with the eager acceleration of people who sense that something shareable is forming in front of them. A whisper passed between 2 women standing near the fountain. A man in a white dinner jacket turned to his companion with a smirk that required no explanation. And from somewhere near the back of the crowd, loud enough to carry, someone said, "Kitchen entrance is around back." The laughter that followed was soft, polished, the kind of laughter that tells itself it isn't cruel because it never raises its voice. General Marcus Reed stopped walking. He stood very still for a moment, absorbing the room the way he had absorbed rooms in far more dangerous places, reading it, understanding it, preparing himself for what it required of him. He reached into his jacket and produced the invitation. Catherine did not take it. He produced his military identification, holding it forward, clearly, patiently. She glanced at it the way one glances at something that has already been decided upon. He said, calmly and clearly, "Ma'am, my name is General Marcus Reed. I was personally invited to escort the bride today. I made a promise to her father, Colonel James Whitfield, and I intend to keep it." She looked past him. Someone behind him said, "Stolen valor." And that phrase, those 2 words, moved through the crowd with a speed and certainty that no truth could have matched, because the crowd was not looking for truth. The crowd was looking for permission. Permission to feel certain about what they had already decided. Permission to stop the uncomfortable work of wondering whether they might be wrong. A senator who sat on the Armed Services Committee, a man who delivered speeches about military sacrifice with practiced emotion, looked directly at Marcus Reed and announced to no one in particular that he personally knew every general in the United States Army. He did not recognize the one standing 3 feet away from him. A billionaire near the fountain snapped his fingers in Marcus's direction. A woman raised her phone higher and whispered to her friend, her voice bright with anticipation, "This is going everywhere." The police arrived within minutes. 2 officers approached General Marcus Reed, and they asked him, with the careful neutrality of men performing a duty they have not fully considered, to place his hands behind his back. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He did not reach for his phone or demand to speak to someone or perform any of the perfectly reasonable things a man in his position might have done. He simply complied. Because discipline is not what a man does when the world treats him fairly. Discipline is what a man does when it doesn't. The handcuffs clicked shut. Metal on wrist, cold and final, in front of 300 witnesses. And the crowd applauded. They applauded. That sound, that self-satisfied, hollow, well-dressed applause rose into the afternoon air and drifted out toward the ocean. And the ocean, to its credit, did not applaud back. Marcus Reed stood very still inside those handcuffs. And for one moment, just one, his hands trembled. Not from fear, not from anger, but from something older and deeper and harder to name. The particular heartbreak of a man who has given everything to something and stands before it in chains and understands with terrible clarity exactly what is happening and exactly why. He closed his eyes. He breathed. He waited. Upstairs, in one of the estate's large sunlit rooms, Captain Daniel Brooks stood before a mirror adjusting the collar of his dress uniform. He was 34 years old, quiet-natured and broad-jawed, with steady hands that had learned their steadiness the hard way. There was a scar along his left forearm, pale and thin and permanent, that he never discussed in casual company. Emily knew the story. She had asked only once, and he had told her quietly, and she had held his arm for a long time afterward without saying anything at all. He had gotten that scar the day General Marcus Reed had shielded him with his own body in a narrow valley where the radio didn't work and the air smelled of smoke, and the odds were not in their favor. Reed had not hesitated, not for a fraction of a second. Daniel heard the commotion from the window. He stepped closer, he looked down, and the world shifted beneath him in a way that had nothing to do with the ground. The man who had saved his life was standing in handcuffs in the middle of a sunlit courtyard, surrounded by laughter and raised phones and the casual celebratory cruelty of people who had never once been required to sacrifice anything for anyone. Daniel did not think. He moved. Through the hallway, down the staircase, through the side doors, across the terrace. His dress shoes slipped on the grass and he nearly went down, caught himself with one hand and kept running, because there are moments when a man's entire life narrows down to a single direction and everything else falls away completely. He stopped 10 feet from General Reed. His chest was heaving. His eyes were already wet, because some things bypass every wall a person builds around themselves and go straight to the center, straight to the place where all the real things are kept. He looked at the man who had once covered him with his own body and who now stood dignified and still inside a pair of handcuffs in front of 300 people who were still, some of them, smiling. Daniel came to attention, every muscle, every inch, perfect and sharp and completely unshaking. His right hand rose in a salute so precise, so full of meaning, that several people nearby stepped back without knowing why. "General Marcus Reed, sir." His voice cracked once on the name, then steadied itself. "Captain Daniel Brooks requests permission to approach." Silence. Not quiet, not a lull. Silence. The complete, sudden, total absence of every sound that had been filling that courtyard, as though the afternoon itself had paused to pay attention. And then, from the edges of the crowd, movement. 20 military officers who had been seated among the guests, men and women in dress uniforms who had recognized Marcus Reed the moment they saw him and had said nothing, waiting, perhaps, to see what the room would do, rose from their chairs and moved forward. They came to attention. 20 right hands rose. 20 salutes, offered in perfect unison in the direction of a man in handcuffs. 20 quiet, unshakable declarations of truth. Phones lowered, one by one, slowly, like lights going out in a building at the end of the night. The police captain looked at the military identification again. This time, he read it fully. This time, he read everything on it. The color left his face slowly and did not return. He reached for the handcuffs. The metal fell away. But what had been done What had been seen and laughed at and filmed and applauded, that remained in the air like smoke after a fire, invisible, but impossible to ignore. Emily Brooks stood at the edge of the terrace in her white dress, having heard the commotion and come outside in time to see the salutes, in time to see the handcuffs removed, in time to understand with complete and devastating clarity what had happened in the hour before her wedding. She turned to her mother. "You had him arrested." Her voice was barely above a whisper, and yet every person within 20 feet heard it perfectly. "You humiliated the man who saved Daniel's life." Catherine Caldwell opened her mouth. Nothing came out. General Reed, rubbing his wrists quietly with one hand, turned to the senator who stood nearby, still holding his champagne glass, still wearing the expression of a man trying to locate an exit. "Senator?" His voice was calm, entirely, completely calm. The calm of a man who has nothing left to prove and knows it. "Senator, we have met 6 times. You sat across from me at the Joint Chiefs briefing in March of 2019. You shook my hand. You looked me in the eye and called me an American hero." He let that sit. The senator said nothing. "Today," Marcus said quietly, "you saw what you expected to see." He turned to the billionaire who had snapped his fingers at him. "You told me I was nobody." A pause, long and deliberate, with the ocean breathing steadily in the distance. "You could have listened. That was all. No rage, no performance, no demand for apology. Just 4 words placed into the silence with the precision of a man who has spent a lifetime understanding that the truth, spoken calmly, is always louder than anger. And it broke them. Quietly, thoroughly, completely. Daniel stepped forward. "Sir," his voice was shaking, but he did not look away. "I understand completely if you want to leave. I would not blame you. No one here could blame you." General Marcus Reed looked at him for a long moment. He looked at the scar on Daniel's forearm. He looked at the uniform. He looked at the young man standing before him, the boy he had carried out of a valley, the soldier he had watched grow into someone worth being proud of, the groom who had run across a lawn in dress shoes, because some things are worth running for. And then, softly, the way men speak when words cost something real, he said, "Daniel, I gave you my word." Daniel Brooks broke. Right there, in full dress uniform, decorations catching the light, tears falling without apology in front of 300 strangers who had just spent an hour proving they did not deserve to witness what they were now witnessing. He wept the way soldiers weep, not often, not easily, and not for small things. He wept because dignity had just defeated cruelty without raising its voice. He wept because the man he owed his life to had shown up anyway. He wept because a promise made in a hospital room 7 years ago had just walked through an iron gate in a modest sedan, stood quietly in handcuffs, and refused, absolutely refused, to become anything less than itself. The guests returned to their seats, not with the lightness of people resuming a celebration, but with the careful, heavy movements of people carrying something new and unfamiliar, the particular weight of having been wrong in public in a way that cannot be taken back. The music resumed. General Marcus Reed straightened his jacket, smoothed his lapel, checked the medals above his breast pocket one final time, not from vanity, but from respect. Respect for the man who had pinned them there and for the man who was waiting at the end of the aisle. He turned to Emily. She looked at him with eyes full of everything she didn't have words for. grief for her father, gratitude for this man, and the profound, aching recognition that the person standing beside her had loved her father enough to walk through humiliation to keep a promise made at a deathbed. He offered his arm. She took it without a word, and they walked, through the parted crowd, beneath the chandeliers, past the roses and the champagne, and the 300 people who had applauded a good man's humiliation less than an hour ago, and who now could not find a single place to rest their eyes. The ocean roared behind them, not in triumph, not in judgment, simply as witness, simply as the one thing in that courtyard that had been paying attention from the very beginning. General Marcus Reed walked that young woman down the aisle the same way he had walked through every difficult thing in his life. Head level, shoulders square, eyes forward, and not one single step taken in shame. Because that is who he was. Not because the crowd finally recognized it, not because the handcuffs had been removed, but because that is who he had always been. And no room, no crowd, no pair of handcuffs, and no amount of applause from people who should have known better had ever had the power to change that. If you had been standing in that courtyard that afternoon, if you had been one of those 300 people dressed beautifully, holding your champagne, watching a man in a tailored suit walk through the gate alone, would you have laughed? Would you have raised your phone? Would you have said nothing and looked away? Or would you have been the one to set down your glass, walk forward, and simply ask his name? Because that is all it would have taken. One person, one question, one moment of choosing curiosity over assumption. The world does not change all at once. It changes one courtyard at a time, one salute at a time, one person running across a lawn in dress shoes because they refuse to stand still while someone they love is being diminished. Be that person. The world has enough watchers. It needs more runners. If this story moved something deep inside you, something quiet that doesn't have a name but feels like it matters, then you already know what Beyond the Badge is about. We tell the stories that deserve to be told, the ones about ordinary people who carried extraordinary weight with grace, the ones about dignity that doesn't ask permission, the ones about promises kept at great cost, and salutes offered without hesitation, and love that shows up even when it isn't easy. If that is something you want more of, then subscribe to Beyond the Badge. Hit the bell so you never miss a story, and share this one with someone who needs to be reminded today that character always outlasts cruelty. We will see you in the next story, right here, Beyond the Badge, where the real heroes are finally heard.